I am more than honored to be here because what we're talking about, I don't consider myself an expert in this field, but I am an expert in being myself, and I am looking forward to sharing my story with you. And so I wanted to sit in conversation and ask questions, and I'm really looking forward to talking back and forth with y'all and hearing some of y'all experiences. And so that's why instead of doing, a whole speech as if I'm some sort of expert to teach you something, I just want to have a more of a communal conversation. I hope that's okay with y'all. So I'm gonna give you the mic.
Okay, so we were in the back talking, right, about the fact that we just want to kick it. So that's what we're gonna do. I need a little volume on here, I think. So here's one thing. There are some things that, of course, we've talked about today that were excellent. And I think that what I would love to hear, me personally, and then I'm going to give you all an opportunity to tell us some of the things that you'd like to hear from Mr. Kweli. I would love to hear from him how he's dealt with the pandemic as an artist. Because we've talked about that, right? We talked about art as a therapy, right? And how you can use art to really bring you out of all kinds of funk, right? So artists typically have a process, right? And you all have things to write with. You have paper. Y'all can jot down some questions that you might want to ask. We probably won't get around to everybody's, but this is a blessing in that you get the opportunity to ask the question that you want to ask, right? So write your questions down. And as we talk, we get it finished, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. So, Mr. Kweli, I know that artists have a process typically. We don't very often not often do you just kind of fall into something. You typically have a process for development. So my question to you is, first, has your process for creation changed any during the pandemic or as a result of the pandemic? And if it has, how has it changed? How have you dealt with that change?
Well, first off, I am somebody who's always prided myself on how hard I worked and the amount of work and my output. And I look at these other MCs and other artists, and I'm like, I may not be as charismatic as some, or as talented as some, or even as good at making music as some of them. But I always was proud of myself for being able to outwork a lot of artists. And I would do 200 shows a year. I'm about to drop my 18th album, and I feel like that served me. But that's a reward, and it's a gift and it's a curse because, friends of mine would say, you look tired or you need rest, and to me, I would wear that as a compliment instead of understanding that it was something that people were saying out of love because they were concerned about my health. And that is okay in that spirit of competing in the competition. I don't even look at it as competition anymore, but that spirit of trying to outdo everybody is something you can try to outdo everybody and try to outdo yourself, I think. And so when the pandemic happened, it was a scary moment because my identity was wrapped up in how much I work. And when there was no more work, when I couldn't go on the road, it was the first time in my life where I actually questioned who I was. I never had that issue before. Like many in my community and in poor communities of color, I was somebody who not scoffed, but I didn't understand the need for even seeing a therapist. I didn't look at it as weak, but I just looked at it as something that's for other people. And my mother, who's a professor, she also overworks herself. She's still working. She hasn't retired. She mentioned casually in conversation that she saw a therapist years ago. And I was like, wow, my mother, who I thought is the bastion of strength in my life, as strong as she needs to go speak to somebody else. And it changed the way I thought about it. Now, I haven't gone to see a therapist. I was married. I got a divorce. But while I was married, I did some marriage counseling. I don't know if that counts as going to a therapist. But one of the privileges of being an artist, for me personally, is that the art is therapy. Now, you use the term art therapy, and I know that you guys have been talking about that here, and I haven't been here to hear the discussions around it. When I saw it on the paper for where I was coming to, it's the first time I heard the term art therapy. But it made so much sense to me because I feel like it's a privilege as an artist that I get to express myself, and I feel like that's been very helpful in my life. My art, I've always looked at it as my therapy, and this is the first time I've seen it treated in this way. But I started by talking about my mother's experience because I don't want people to think that just because I'm an artist, that means I shouldn't go to therapy. And even though that's not a step that I've taken, this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. Um, because the pandemic shut down stages, I started going into my computer and listening to songs I recorded and things I've done. There was so much stuff that I had done that I forgot that I did. And I'm like, I could start monetizing some of this stuff. I'll just give you a quick example. Um, in order to perform at the level I was performing, I was compensating with a lot of uh, drinking and smoking and staying up late, which are not healthy, not eat right, not just not healthy, unhealthy things. And so, but I was still creating at a high level. There's an artist named Craig G, who is one of the artists I grew up listening to. He was on a song called The Symphony with Marley Marl and Master Ace and Big Daddy Kane and Coogee Rap. And I'm listening to this Craig G song. He did an album with Marley Marl in 2011. And I'm like, man, this song is so dope. It's good. I can't believe I missed this project. I never heard the song. It's pretty good. And then my verse came on. I was like, oh, I'm on this song. No wonder I like this song. But I swear, I didn't remember doing the song. And as I listened to the verse, I'm like, it started to come back to me, but I couldn't really remember it. I just had to use context clues. And I had to be like, okay, Craig G must have hit me up one night when I was in the studio and asked me to do this verse. And I probably just was drunk or high and did the verse and knocked it out and sent it to him and never thought about it again back in 2010 or 2011. And now when it's 2020, the pandemic, it's really the first time I'm hearing the song. And that experience made me slow down because I'm like, it was really good what I did. I really liked it. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good, But it's like that's how I was overworking myself and not paying attention to things that I had done. And so, I started a Patreon page, which that didn't work the way I wanted it to, but I started dropping some songs that were just all these songs that no one ever heard. And that's the first thing I did during the pandemic is to learn how to embrace what I've already done instead of always trying to go out and create more.
So you realized that you had treasures that were stored away during the pandemic. I think that's true for a lot of us. I know it was for me. Maybe not necessarily in rap, since I'm not a rapper, but there were just things in my life that I just had not paid attention to, and I know y'all experienced the same thing. There was stuff going on around me that I didn't realize. There was stuff going on in my household I didn't realize, just because we were moving too damn fast. Just doing too much, just being busy doing nothing. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of time, what I realized is that there was a lot of life that I wasn't living, even though I thought I was living life, if that makes sense. And I know it does, because we all going through this together. The interesting thing, though, is it's not even over. We're still in the midst of it. It's not even over. So, okay, so that was really interesting. You said something about, about the fact that you were self-soothing for the most part, with alcohol and whatever was available when you were on this rat run, really, because that's what it's like. So my question to you is, were there by any chance, in your community, in the artist community, was there anyone, did you see anyone who was open about the fact that they used professional services? Were you ever in your community? Did you ever see somebody who said to you, "No, I'm not doing this. Because I got a date with my therapist. Because I know that we run from therapy, especially in the Black community. But some of us are not running. There are a few. There are some. Did you see anybody? Did you have any example?
I'm sure if I thought about it, had time to think about it, I could think of examples of people who are in my community, in my industry, who have been open about their journey with that. But the most glaring example I could think in terms of people doing it in their music is Kendrick Lamar. His last album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I mean, I actually he talks about therapy so much on this album that I make fun of it. I'm like, Kendrick's album is like, I'm going to therapy, I'm going to therapy, therapy, therapy. Um, I'm being facetious. I'm making fun of it, but I really like that he did that, and I like the songs a lot. I think he might have talked about therapy on every single song on this last album, and it's really important. It was really a huge step because he didn't sacrifice any of the musicality. He didn't sacrifice any of the rawness. He dove straight in. There's a song, I forget the name of it, that he just dropped a video for, whereas it's him and his girl yelling at each other, and its song is detailing all the toxic things we say to each other in arguments, and they're acting out this, playing this out, and it's a tough listen because they're yelling at each other and using very toxic language. There's another song he has about his uncle who was a trans person, and him having to get over his biases and stuff like that, and I just like the fact that Kendrick is not afraid to elevate hip hop. He's always done that. He won the Pulitzer Prize because of it. He's made albums that feel more like operas than hip hop albums. Um, his albums feel like, we were talking about spoken word earlier. His albums feel like spoken word. They feel like jazz music, and I think because he's taken us on this journey, it actually makes the music better. And I think he's a shining example. I haven't heard somebody address it head on like that. There's another artist, Jean Grey, female rapper that was signed to my label. She talks about it in her music a little bit, but I mean, I think that for what we're talking about here, I think people should check out that Kendrick Lamar album.
I'm gonna check it out tonight. Now that you said it, I don't even know who Kendrick. I mean, I've heard the name, of course, and my kids listen to it, but I don't really know who that is. Okay, okay. I shouldn't have said it out loud in public. Don't say it in public. But I'm going to find him tonight, though. Oh, yeah? Okay, okay. I'm going to take y'all word for it. So let me ask you this. Y'all ready? I know y'all ready for your questions, right? Listen, y'all are the most open I've seen you all night. Y'all been open, but y'all really open now because your eyeballs are telling me you're open. Hey, you see it?
I want to add something before so we were talking about this rise and grind thing, and I want to be clear because as an artist, I have a unique, you have privileges that you're born with and privileges that you've earned from your work. And as an artist, I have a very unique privilege to be able to determine my schedule and to be able to wax philosophically and talk in high, lofty ideals when a lot of people just have to get up and go to work. No matter how bad they feel, how good they feel, they don't have the luxury of being able to determine their schedule, right? So I want to be clear that as an artist, I'm very clear what my privilege is when I talk about self-care and taking care of myself. And I want to make sure that's understood, that we're talking about it in the community. We're talking about largely people who don't have the choice to be able to take time off. And this whole like being proud of yourself for working yourself to death it's a function of capitalism. It's something that's designed for people who are making money off of our labor and our sweat equity, for us to like take on their value system. And I just came back from I did a show in South Africa, but normally I would have flown to Johannesburg and then flown back and got right back on the job. And instead of doing that, there's an artist named Madlib who I'm working on my second album with. I brought Madlib with me. He had never been to Africa. His friend Jack Wildchild from the Loop Pack, he had never been to Africa, so he joined us. I realized that I have 3 children, and I've been to Africa several times. My children have never been, so I brought my son with me. And instead of coming right back, we went to Zanzibar. We spent a week in Zanzibar. And I just landed back yesterday. And my son has traveled with me before. But I said to him when we got off the plane, I said, man, thank you for taking this trip with me. And he said, yeah, thank you for bringing me. He said, I've traveled with you before, but this is the first time we've been somewhere where you weren't working. And it just hit different. We were able to spend more time, have more conversation. And that wasn't my initial thought. That was a byproduct. I just wanted my son to see Africa. But the fact that he said that to me, I hadn't even thought about that aspect, and it really hit home for me, is that, to take time off to just go to islands with your friends is something that, again, I have a luxury and a privilege to do. But if you have the privilege to do that, I encourage people to do that. We used to as human beings, we used to wake up, and as long as we had food, clothes, and shelter, we spend the day with our families, and we spend the day trying to find joy and happiness and pleasure, and not to get on no Aleister Crowley, because life can't just be about looking for pleasure, right? But but the pursuit of happiness is a God-given right, and it's something that is something that we should all strive for. And so I just want to add that.
So when you said that, I thought about the fact that we are, we have been duped into being the labor group, right? And unless there is some cognizant, conscious reason for us to break out, we won't do that. We're just a part of the labor group. And like you said, everybody is capitalism. Everybody bills on my back, right? So I did that. I was blessed enough to come out of the professional system, the educational system, and into another place. But that's another story. All I want to say is this: if you find yourself in a 9 to 5 and cannot get out, or you feel like you cannot or can't get out, or you can't see the out right now, I would strongly urge you to at least, because if you never know, if you never knew, you know today that we're not going to be here forever. If you didn't know before 2019, you know now, because everybody in here has lost somebodies that are so close to us that we had no idea was going to leave us. So we don't. So a lifetime could be a very short time, you know. So if if you're in a 9 to 5, I would strongly suggest that you make it your business to at least, whether it's one day out of a month or one day out of a week or whatever, do what the hell you need to do for you. I strongly suggest that, and then I would suggest just do it until you can get out of it altogether and do what it is that your soul is calling you to do, you know, or what you were created to do. There's something I like to say about artists that I think is a revelation that I got a minute ago. Probably once I left my job, though. You know, when I was in my 9 to 5 and I was teaching every day, that's just what I was doing. But when I got out of it and I had some time to kind of think about different things, I remember thinking, there is something to say about a starving artist, right? And what I thought was, you really got to be grounded. And that's not really what we think about artists. You know, they flighty, or they sometimey, you never know what, you know. But there's something to say about a person who put it all on the line and say, I'm just going to do what I feel like I was created to do. You know, whatever it takes. That might be separation from family sometimes. It may be separation from things that you love or you desire. It's separation from knowing that you're going to have 3 hots and a cot every day, all day, because that ain't always the case with an artist. But you got to be close to the center, because you have to be close to the center to feel your way through it. It's really a faith walk. You know, we talk a lot about that in church and religious spaces and places. But it's really more of it's a faith. You don't have to be faithful if you know you're going to punch a clock and they're going to give you a check at the end of the week. That don't take faith. It just take energy. You know what I'm saying? It just take your legs to be moving. But if I don't punch a clock and I just trust that I'm in the right space doing what I need to do, ain't no clock to punch. And so ain't nothing coming at the end of the week unless it comes in divine ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm biased because I'm an artist, so I couldn't agree more. And I do think that I think that being an artist for a living is one of the bravest choices you can make. But just to add on to what I was saying earlier, the challenge is to be able to do that and not be a burden to the people around you. If you can find a way to do that and just, you know, still handle your responsibilities, especially if you have children, that's really, really, really the challenge. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, is that sounds great, it's romantic, and it's beautiful. But if you're living that way and you're a burden on other people, you're still not fulfilling your purpose, I think.
That was good. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. During COVID, my son is m- lives in New York, and I was stuck for the first 2 months of it in LA. And if y'all remember, you couldn't really move around at the beginning of it. We didn't really understand what was going on. Nobody wanted to get on planes, and so that was a difficult time for me. And then I ended up coming to Ohio um, that summer, which was a very healing time for me. Um, but then that was driving distance for my kids. So a couple of times I would drive to New York or they would drive to Ohio, but I still didn't see them a lot during the pandemic, um, or during the first year or so. And then when the world started to open up, I saw them more. But to your point, as particularly as black fathers, there's a ugly stereotype that we're not in the lives of our children. And when you look at the data, that couldn't be further away from the truth. If you look at the data, black fathers on the average spend more quality time with their children. Um, the reason that myth still pervades is because people are not getting married as much as they used to. So they're looking at people not being married as fathers not being in a home. But if you look at the actual time they're spending, us collectively we're doing a good job. And as a black father, I tend to I'm proud of this, and I've always been proud of my relationship with my children. Um, but it was based on this thing I was talking about. This I work so hard, I work so hard, work so hard, and like to your point, that's cool and all, and I'm sure that my family appreciates that. But my son really appreciated being with me when I wasn't working, and I wasn't able to see that until he said that. And he's 26 years old now, so it took him to that age to be able to even say that to me. So it was good. It was very good for me to hear him say that.
Okay, so I have some questions in my hand, and I will ask one of them. But when I finish, I'll take one from the audience. So if anybody has questions, get ready. The first question is, what advice do you have for men in their health ESP? In other words, what do you have to say about the Superman syndrome?
Can you define Superman syndrome?
Not really, because I didn't write this question, but I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Yeah. So Superman syndrome, and I'm assuming it says men. So yeah, I can speak on this. Because the brothers typically, they act like they're Superman.
Well, I think that I try to be intersectional in the way I speak, and I try to not use gender terms, and I think that uh, when we focus too much on traditional, um, we tend to ignore and erase experiences that people have in our community. So, as a man, I've been socialized to be a provider and to be proud of myself as a provider and to identify as a provider. But if we're going to keep it a buck, um, for a lot of reasons we can get into sociological, political, women and particularly in our communities, have had to step into the role of the provider in ways that they've never had to. Well, not never had to, but in ways that have never been recognized before. And so, while the question is specific to men, I do believe it can apply to everybody. Um, that if you're the type of person that needs to provide and doesn't leave room for any excuse, that um, that you could sometimes be on that treadmill and not pay attention. If you're working so hard to provide that you're working yourself into the grave, then you're not really doing a good job of providing. And I think that um, specifically as men, we have to be more willing to say that there's nothing wrong with having emotions or being emotional. There's nothing wrong with being soft. There's nothing wrong with being fragile. Um, because our community faces disproportionate poverty and violence, we look at these things as completely negative. There's no room to be soft, to be fragile, to show tears. Men don't cry. Men don't feel, and I think that can be destructive. Um, and so, I think it's about using that intellect, using that logic to know when it's time to be emotionally logical. And I think that's very difficult for a lot of people, a lot of men, a lot of women too. Um, and again, I'm trying to be cautious with my words here because again, I'm not the expert on these subjects. I can only speak from my experience. But for me, as I've grown, I see misogynistic attitudes in our communities. I see homophobic attitudes in our communities that lead to a certain brand of toxicity that can be very destructive in our homes. Um, that sort of cutting off your emotions and not appreciating that you can be fragile and that you have the capacity to be harmed makes you want to respond in a violent way sometimes. And that might not be your intention, but again, when it comes to oppression, intentions don't matter, only results do. And because as men we live in a patriarchal system, we are automatically born as members of an oppressor group. And I think we have to be cognizant of that and be careful and put extra emphasis on making sure that we don't go down that path.
That reminds me of something I heard. This is the second time I've talked about this. I was in a meeting